In the parietal lobe, you're going to be receiving all sorts of sensory information, right? Special senses, things like that, and it's going to get processed and then integrated within the parietal lobe. And so we got the primary somatosensory cortex, you got the somatosensory association cortex, and then you got your gustatory cortex. Gustatory, what does that relate to? Taste. Good. Yeah. So gustatory means taste. And so if you're processing the taste of something, that's going to be where it's taking place at. And then we were talking about the homunculus. Next time we meet, I'll bring the neurohammer. I didn't bring it today, but when we do cranial nerves, we'll do some physical exams on each other as well, like some of the more typical physical exams that you'll do. But homunculus, that's going to be where you have representation of different parts of the body represented, on the real estate of the brain, right? So you have disproportionate areas dedicated to the face, to the hands, because facial expressions are super important, as well as maintaining dexterity, and sensation is also going to be important in the ability to, manipulate things in the environment. You want to be able to feel things as you're manipulating tools. And then last time we closed off, we were discussing what it means to be able to do proprioception. And with proprioception, that's where your appendages are in three-dimensional space, right? So if you close your eyes and you wave your hand out to the right, you should be able to know that your hand's out in the right. And there's going to be aspects of your skeletal muscle that help to contribute to proprioception, right? There's going to be sensory input from skeletal muscle, joints as well. So you should be able to figure out where your limbs are in three-dimensional space. Other sensory areas. So the part of the sensory association area also includes parts of the occipital lobe. So you have visual data and visual input coming in to get processed by these different regions. And then you have the primary visual cortex, and that's where the visual information finally gets interpreted and then integrated. You also have auditory association areas that's going to be close to the temporal lobe. So remember the temporal lobes next to your ears, right? So whenever you have auditory information coming in, that's where it's taking place at. And this helps to allow you to identify lots of different things, whether it's someone's face. You can also identify sounds like music and things like that at the level of the temporal lobe. So a little bit different than the cortical spinal tract, where you have two major neurons. You have the one neuron coming in from the central nervous system, and you have it synapsing with the neuron that goes off to the peripheral nervous system. The sensory afferent pathways are going to involve three different neuron systems. So you're going to have your first order neuron that goes from peripheral nervous system and then synapses within the central nervous system. So peripheral to central. Your second order neuron is going to go from the central nervous system, aka the spinal cord, up to the thalamus. And that's why we have terms like the spinal thalamic tract, right? Because remember, the thalamus is going to be a relaying center. Almost all sensory input goes through the thalamus at some point, right? With the exception of, which one? Do you remember last time we were talking? Smell. Yes, with the exception of smell. Smell is the only sense that's going to bypass the thalamus, and it goes directly to get integrated into memory, hippocampus, areas like that. So anyways, CNS to the thalamus. Here is where you have crossing over, right, or decussation. And then the third order neuron that goes from thalamus to the sensory cortex, the primary sensory cortex. So three separate neurons associated with the afferent pathways, right? Afferent coming in, right? Versus efferent. So one of the most important regions of the spinal thalamic tract is going to be your dorsal column pathway. Some people refer to this as the posterior pathway. There's some textbooks that refer to it that way, but I'm not going to. I'm going to refer to it as the dorsal column pathway. Okay, that's how I learned it when I was in med school, and it's a commonly used term in neuroscience. Dorsal column pathway is really important for things like fine touch, vibrations, also proprioception, right, where your appendages are in three-dimensional space. And when it comes to sensory input, recall that at the spinal cord, it's going to be going into the dorsal horn, right? So you're going to have the dorsal root ganglia, which is going to be where sensory input comes in from. So dorsal root, afferent, and then this one over here, the dorsal columns, that's going to cross over at the medulla. This is kind of similar to another column that decussates at the medulla. What's that other column that we talked about last time? Is it either anterior or lateral spinal thalamic tract? Yeah, so the lateral spinal thalamic tract decussates where? It's also referred to as the pyramidal system because it decussates at the pyramids. Okay, the pyramids are going to be a little structure on the anterior portion of the medulla. Okay, so you have decussation at the pyramids. Here, the dorsal column pathway also decussates at the medulla, but not at the pyramids. Different area, but you can think of this as being kind of similar to the lateral spinal thalamic tract. Anterior spinal thalamic tract is going to be more associated with like crude touch, pressure. Okay, so pressure and crude touch will be anterior spinal thalamic. Again, dorsal horns, right? So dorsal root ganglia, it's afferent. And this one, on the other hand, crosses at the spinal cord, not the medulla. So anterior is going to be a little bit different. And then you have the lateral spinal thalamic tract, and that's going to be associated with pain and temperature. Again, dorsal root ganglia, afferent signals, and again, crosses at the spinal cord. So here's a summary of those three main columns that I want you to be familiar with for this class. There's other columns that we might go into more detail when we discuss like the whole section on sensory pathway, and there's other columns for motor pathway, but these are the three main ones that I want you to be familiar with for the sake of exam 1. Okay, so posterior column pathway, know what they do: proprioception, vibration, fine touch. Anterior spinal thalamic, crude touch, pressure. Lateral spinal thalamic, pain and temperature. And then here's the columns if you were to do an axial or a transverse cross-section of the spinal cord, you'd be able to see these columns. So this is your dorsal column, and the dorsal column pathway involves these different regions. So you got the fasciculus cuneatus and the fasciculus gracilis. So that's part of the posterior column pathway. And then you have your lateral and anterior spinal thalamic tracts. So those are your anterior lateral pathways. All right, question?
I forgot to ask you. So obviously there's not a lab component for this class. Do you even know like specific like anatomy and ask like what is this? Point at it.
We're gonna do our first quizzes today. The second quizzes has a lot of that. The first quiz is not as much, but the second quiz is already built out for you guys. It has an image of the brainstem, and it has arrows pointing to the different cranial nerves, and it's like, if you had this cranial nerve damaged, what's going to be the symptoms? Okay, so things like that I'm going to ask you about. I might ask you questions about the specific tracts on the spinal cord that I want you to be familiar with, right? Whether it's the anterior spinal thalamic tract or the lateral spinal thalamic tract, I might point on a picture of a cross-section of the spinal cord at that area and say, if you had damage here, what would be affected? So things like that might show up on the exam. Good question. All right, so let's pair and share. So team up with your best friend from last time, and let's kind of do the same thing as we did last time. So answer these questions. I'll give you about 2 or so minutes, and then we'll go through them all together.
Oh, yeah, okay. Because the anterior Okay. Pain and temperature. Roots are all the dorsal. Yep. All after. Okay. Perfect. Great work, Israel.
Dr. Up,
Yes, sir.
what is it? Can you explain to me crude touch?
Crude touch. So instead of fine touch, crude touch would be maybe like a little bit more pressure, right? So maybe if you're at a mosh pit at a punk rock show or something, and you're like shoving into each other, that'd be like, if you're not getting actually hurt, right, that would be like crude touch, right? Like rough and tumble,
Yeah.
right? All right, so we're going to go through this together, and I want to play a little video about a 4-minute video on neurosyphilis, because neurosyphilis can potentially affect one of these tracts. All right, so let's start with the dorsal column. What does that do? What kind of sensations? Fine touch, proprioception. Did you say proprioception? Vibration, proprioception. So I just gave you the answer for that. So good. Where does it cross over? Medulla, good. So it's kind of similar to which tract? One of the cortical spinal ones. Yeah, so it's similar to lateral cortical spinal. Roots. Dorsal, good. All these are going to be dorsal root, okay? All right, anterior spinal thalamic. What does that do? Crude touch, pressure, right? Crosses over at the spinal cord, yes. Roots, dorsal, right? What about lateral spinal thalamic? Pain and temperature, perfect. Crosses over, spinal cord, and then the roots, dorsal. Awesome. Let me pull up a really quick video that I found. Oh no. Is it hot in here now? So where is that 4-minute video? I thought I was going to play a 4-minute video for you guys, but I can't find it here. You know what? I'll post the link into the class announcements so you guys can watch that on your own time. All these other ones are 10-minute ones. I can't find the exact video. These are sounds. Maybe this is the one. Oh, here we go. Yeah. All right, so let's watch this video on tabes dorsalis, which is neurosyphilis.
Hi, I am Dr. Sakir Matsoor, and this is my channel Learning Anatomy for You. And today I will discuss with you tabes dorsalis. And tabes dorsalis summary is that number A is paresthesias, pain, and polyuria. This is 3 P's: paresthesias, pain, and polyuria. And these associations are late stage syphilis, also known as tertiary syphilis, sensory ataxia, positive rhombic sign, sways when eyes are closed, right? When the patient walks and he sways to one side, that's when the eyes are closed. Of course, that is involvement of the dorsal column, medial lemniscus. I will tell you later on. Suppressed reflexes and Argyll Robertson pupils. That I will tell you later on with the picture. And C is the location of the lesion is common at lumbar cord levels. These torticollis patients present with, these are the clinical correlates. They present with paresthesias, that is pins and needles sensations, pain, polyuria, and Roebuck sign as told earlier. It is one possible manifestation of neurosyphilis. It is a result of bilateral degeneration of dorsal roots. Right there, you can see these are the dorsal roots. Their degeneration, and then is the secondary degeneration of the dorsal columns. Here they are the dorsal columns, medial meniscus, right? Fasciculus gracilis and the fasciculus cuneatus. There may occur impaired vibration and position sense, paroxysmal pains, ataxia, and astereogenesis, as well as diminished stretch reflexes or incontinence, right? Of course, this is all results of this dorsal column damage.
All right, so that's a consequence of having advanced syphilis, right? So when you get syphilis, there's a couple different forms. You get primary, secondary, and tertiary syphilis. Once tertiary syphilis starts to set in, that's when you have the neuronal components taking place. And so it can affect different parts of your brain, but if it affects the spinal cord, that's tabes dorsalis, and it's going to be affecting that dorsal column pathway. So as you notice over here, he was talking about a lot of the same type of symptoms that we're talking about, right? So vibration sensation, you might lose sensations of vibration and things like that. You would also potentially lose proprioception, and that's why you might have a strange, unsteady type gait when you have neurosyphilis. There's also cognitive things that come into play too. We're not going to be going too much into. Actually, I might include a section on neurosyphilis in this class because I think it's really fascinating. Lots of famous people in history have had neurosyphilis. One of my favorites, Friedrich Nietzsche, German philosopher, he had advanced stage neurosyphilis towards the end of his life, and that's how he started to develop like severe dementia as a consequence. Some other less savory characters like Adolf Hitler was said to have advanced syphilis. Ludwig van Beethoven, the composer, right, pianist, towards the end of his life when he lost his hearing, some attribute it to the fact that his dad whacked him in the ear when he played a wrong note, but that's when he was a kid, right? He had his hearing for like most of his life, but he started losing his hearing towards the end of his life. And some people think it's because Beethoven did have syphilis, and so it might have been affecting the regions of his brain associated with hearing, right? The vestibular cochlear nerve, maybe other areas in the temporal area of his brain, who knows? But anyways, any questions on the tracts? So we might go into more detail on different tracts later on. I'm debating on whether or not I want to go into like a lot of detail on it because there's quite a few different tracts, but the ones that we covered just now, those are the major tracts that you need to be responsible for. Okay. All right, so let's move on now to the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe, very simple stuff, right? That's where you have visual processing, the eyes in the back of your head, right? So you can do visual, spatial processing. This is where depth perception takes place. Color is going to be interpreted in the occipital lobe, face recognition, memories, all of that, etc. That's all going to be part of the occipital lobe. And the way visual input comes in, it's going to be arriving at your retinas, right? And then once you get to your retinas, it's going to go through cranial nerve number 2, right? Which is going to be your optic nerve. And then cranial nerve 2 eventually gets to the optic chiasm. It's a little tiny X-shaped region on the ventral part of the brain. And then it's going to go through the optic tracts. So we're going to talk about lesions of different parts of these optic tracts and how those present in different types of anopsia, which means you're losing vision in different like areas. You can get like hemianopsia, which means you lose an entire half of vision. You can get other types as well, where you're just losing like little quadrants. So we're going to go into all those later on when we get into vision. The insular cortex. This is one of my personal favorite regions of the brain. I think it's absolutely fascinating. There's more research going into the insula as of late. The reason why it's so fascinating is because the insula is going to contain certain types of neurons that you only really find in certain organisms, like humans, also some of the great apes, like chimpanzees, some other animals like cetaceans, like dolphins, whales. It's a specific type of neuron called a von Economo neuron, named after Dr. von Economo. And those are also referred to as mirror neurons. If you've ever heard about a mirror neuron, that's what we're talking about. What does it do? It allows social animals like humans and great apes and things like that to have good social relationships with each other, right? So it allows for pro-social type behaviors. Empathy, emotion, that's really heavy within the insula and the von Economo neurons. If you see a person getting hit by a bus, right, you kind of feel the pain a little bit. You know, you're like, I'm glad it was him and not me, but you still feel the pain. When you feel the pain, right, that's the von Economo neurons, right? There's been studies done where they, show videos and images of people getting hurt, like having like a hammer hit them. Like you feel that pain when you see it, right? And that's going to be involved in the insular cortex. So what else does the insula do? You have taste perception, gustatory perception in there as well. Risk reward behavior, some autonomic activity takes place in there. Pain pathways can happen in there. Auditory and vestibular function can also happen there too. So here's your von Economo neurons. So this is Dr. von Economo over here. He was a famous psychiatrist and neurologist who discovered these way back in the day. And like I said, more research is going into it nowadays. It's really cool. All right, these are the mirror neurons. And it's going to be really important in things like empathy, social awareness, self-control, okay? And again, you see this in humans. You see it in certain primates, like the great apes, but you don't see it in all primates. You only see it in the ones that are like really kind of like social, right? You see it in things like animals like bonobos. You see it in chimpanzees, animals like that, both of which are some of our closest relatives. So the insular cortex, why is it called the insula? Yeah, exactly. And I spelt that wrong, Usula. So it's the insula, right? Insula cortex. So like this with an I. It's insulated, right? So you have to peel it apart. You have to peel away the part of the parietal lobe, frontal lobe, away from the temporal lobe, and then you can actually see it. It's easier to see if you do like a full-on, like a coronal cut through the brain, then you can actually see it right there. But cool. So moving on. Here are, again, another image of all the landmarks that you need to be familiar with. It's just the major landmarks. You got, portions of your brainstem, midbrain, pons, medulla. You got your cerebellum. You got your corpus callosum. We're going to go into more detail on some of these other deeper structures, especially when we get into like basal ganglia later on. But just be familiar with some of the major structures, like the major glands, like the pineal gland, for example, pituitary gland, or the infundibulum to the pituitary gland. Yes?
So I was looking at the atlas slides, and there's so many terms on there.
There's a lot on there. So I know it's on your own. The things I'm not going to study, I'm not going to like point to something that's like super like insignificant and obscure that I don't talk about in class. If I don't talk about it in class, I'm not going to test you on it. So if there's stuff that's in there that I do talk about, be familiar with those structures, like the major structures. But if it's something that's like just a little bit of minutia, kind of gloss over it. I'm not going to test you on the atlas stuff for the most part. I'm mostly going to focus on appendix. Were you other guys concerned about yeah, it's kind of awful, isn't it? Yeah, it goes into a lot of detail. So focus on the things that I'm talking about in class. That's there for your own pleasure. If you want to read it on your own, by all means. I'm not going to make you responsible for all that stuff. All right, cerebellum. Cerebellum, we talked about it already, but we'll talk about it in more detail again. Very important in refining movements, smoothing out movements, coordinating movement, right? It's really important in muscle tone and posture, right? If you don't have your cerebellum working properly, your posture is not going to be, normal. It's going to be abnormal. Again, smoothing muscles, coordinating eye and body movements. That's why one of the ways that you can measure whether or not there's cerebellum damage is the pronator drift test. You guys remember that from last time, right? Exactly. Supinate your hands, close your eyes, and eventually if you start drifting off, that's pronator drift. That could be cerebellum damage. Could be other regions in the brain too, right? There's other types of drifts, but cerebellum, that'd be one thing that you'd be considering as the area that's affected. If you do that cut through the cerebellum, like a sagittal cut, for example, you're going to see the arbor vitae, the tree of life. That's really nicely depicted on this image over here. Cool. So let's move on from that. These are other things that the cerebellum might be involved in. I am not going to test you on these other things because there's a lot of crossover, right? Just know like the general function of the cerebellum, right? Posture, smoothing out movements, things like that, right? Because there is going to be some crossover, like, determining texture of an object. Parts of your parietal lobe are going to do that as well. Your sensory association areas, your primary somatosensory cortex, that's going to help to determine things like texture as well. Perceiving space, your occipital lobe can help and do that as well. So there's crossover. But just be familiar with the major functions of the cerebellum. So any questions so far? All right, let's get into the spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord, the terms for all the different spinal nerves are going to mostly correspond with the vertebrae throughout the spinal column. They're almost one-to-one, almost. There's only one major exception, and that's going to be up in the cervical region. You're going to have one extra cervical nerve. So C1 comes off at the top of the first cervical vertebrae. Okay, so you got atlas, you got axis below that. C1 is going to come out above the atlas. The other thing that's good to take a note of are going to be the cervical and lumbar enlargements. Okay, those areas are going to be corresponding with like the brachial plexus, for example. That's where you have all those different nerve fibers coming off from the cervical spinal cord to innervate like the upper arm brachium and antebrachium. So you got your cervical and lumbar enlargements. The lumbar enlargements are going to correspond with the lower extremities. And then you have the cauda equina. Now, this is going to be relevant when we especially talk about like lumbar punctures or spinal taps, right? Because you want to know which level the cauda equina is going to be at. Because over here, you're going to have the conus medullaris, which is where the spinal cord ends. And it usually ends at around L1-ish, like L1, maybe L2. And so if you were to stick a needle to be able to, harvest a little bit of CSF from a patient, you don't want to go above a certain level. Otherwise, you might, stab your patient in the spinal cord. And so you go a little bit below that, and you go to around like L3, L4. Sometimes people go to L4, L5 between those spaces, and that's where they insert the needle so they can pull a sample of CSF. And in that area, you're going to be just dealing with the cauda equina. And cauda equina comes from the term horse's tail. So, what's up?
Is that also like during delivery?
Oh, yeah. If you're doing an epidural, nerve block, that's where you would go, right? You would go basically L3, L4 in that area, so you can numb the pain of labor and delivery. Right?
It's like mostly safe.
Oh yeah, it's pretty safe. It's very routine, and like lots of women get that done very regularly, and it's a really good option if you don't want to experience the pain of labor and delivery. So, other reasons why you would do that is just to check the CSF if you're suspecting meningitis, encephalitis. What else? Yeah, if there's any sort of bleed, you might be able to actually find blood if there's like a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you'd be able to find the blood in the CSF if you did a lumbar puncture on that patient. So there's lots of indications to have a patient get a lumbar puncture. Anyways, so here are your vertebrae. So you're going to have 33 vertebrae. You got 7 cervical vertebrae. And notice how many cervical nerves there are, right? So there's 8 cervical nerves. The first one emerges from the top of C1. So you have 7 cervical vertebrae, though, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae. And then when you get down to the sacrum and the coccyx, all those are going to be fused, right? So they're all going to look like one giant bone. But technically speaking, they're considered separate bones. So you have 5 sacral vertebrae and 4 coccygeal vertebrae. This number can sometimes vary a little bit. There's a little bit of variance from person to person, but on average, it's going to be 33 total. Now, in terms of spinal nerves, you got 31. Again, remember that you have 8 cervical nerves, right? First one emerges on top of C1. Then you have 12 thoracic nerves, just like the number of thoracic vertebrae. You have 5 lumbar nerves, just like the number of your lumbar vertebrae. You're going to have 5 sacral, and then you have 1 coccygeal nerve. And when you say pairs, it's because they come in pairs, right? They come out both sides, both left and right. And this is, we already talked about the tracts and which ones are associated with motor and which ones are associated with sensory. So ventral roots are going to be associated with motor. Dorsal roots are going to be associated with sensory input, okay? And again, here's your dorsal root column. That's sensory input. You have your dorsal root ganglia, right? That's a bunch of different nerve bodies all collected all together, right? That's what forms up a ganglia. Then you have your ventral root, which is motor, spinal nerves, which can be both sensory and motor. And then you have your conus medullaris. That's the point where your spinal cord ends, right? And it's going to, on average, end around L1. It could dip into L2 a little bit, depending on the person. Cauda equina, that's going to be coming off of the sacrum as well as the lumbar foramina, right? So the cauda equina, it's going to be coming around like the pelvis. So it innervates a lot of your pelvic organs. So you have like the pudendal nerve that innervates like the genitalia, for example. So those different nerves are going to be really important for various functions around like, genitalia, as well as like around the anus and those areas as well. Phylum terminale. So that's going to be an extension of pia mater. So as you get all the way down to the very end of the spinal cord, when you get to the conus medullaris, the little strand that comes off at the very end that attaches itself to the base of the sacrum to keep the whole spinal cord in place, right? Otherwise, the spinal cord would maybe like move a little bit. So this helps to provide structural stability for the spinal cord. So it's called the phylum terminale, and that's going to be inserting into the coccyx. All right. And then remember your gray matters and white matters, right? So gray matter for the spinal cord is going to be on the inside. White matter is going to be on the outside. And then here's another image. This image over here was done with myelin staining. So they were staining mostly the myelin, right? And remember, myelin is going to be mostly made up of fats, so it would look like white matter. But for myelin staining, it's going to be a little bit darker from the stains. And then here's another image of dorsal root versus ventral root, and you got your dorsal root ganglia. All right, now let's talk briefly about the rexed lamina. So rexed lamina, this is a way that you can see the different little segments within the gray matter of a spinal cord. And so it's going to be numbered 1 through 12. Now, there's only 2 of these that I'm going to make you guys familiar with. Okay, it's going to be numbers 2 and number 9. So we'll get into that in a second. And this one over here is going to show Nissl substances. This is what Nissl substances are. It's going to be made up of like RNA, proteins, aggregated with rough endoplasmic reticulum. So if you want to be more familiar with what that is, that's what that is. It's also involved in protein synthesis. So these are the two major lamina, Rex lamina, that I'm going to make you memorize. So you got number 2 over here, and that's going to be corresponding with this, substantia gelatinosa. So Rex lamina 2 is substantia gelatinosa, and that's going to be associated with pain transmission. So pain fibers are going to go through lamina 2. Then lamina 9 is going to be associated with lower motor neurons. The other Rex lamina are going to be all sorts of things, like interneurons, for example. You got lamina number 7 here. That's the intermediate gray. That's mostly going to be interneurons. Now, interneurons are going to be intermediary neurons, right? So if you have like 3 neurons that are associated with like a reflex, for example, we're going to talk about reflexes later on. If you did like a patella reflex, right? Interneurons are going to be important with, reflexes and, modulating the way information is going to be sent. So most of these different regions are going to be made up of interneurons. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm only having you guys memorize region 2 and region 9. Any questions before we do quizzes? Yes.
So could you go over, I get lamina 9 is related to lower motor neurons with the skeleton also. Like, could you give like an example of like a movement, or is it just like normal movement?
Just like it says over here, it governs limb musculature. I know it seems a little vague, but we're going to talk more about it in chapter 16. When we get into motor movements, we're going to go into it in more detail.
One's pain, one's movement.
Yeah, for the most part. That's kind of how I wanted you to generalize those 2 different regions. One is going to transmit pain sensation. One's going to be transmitting movement. Okay? No sweat. Let's go ahead and do a couple quizzes questions. So I made, I think, 21 for this, so I don't know if we should go through all of them. I'll see how you guys do. If we get bored halfway through it, then we might switch gears. So I was looking it up just to see if there was a nice and easy answer for this. So it's with Rex lamina, it's basically a different nomenclature system instead of looking at like nuclei, because when we get into brainstem, and we're going to talk about cranial nerves a little bit, there's a bunch of nuclei, and nuclei are where you have like a big bundle of cell bodies and dendrites, things like that. And so that's what's kind of going on with Rex lamina. There's just like subdividing all those different nuclei within the spinal cord. So it's like a different nomenclature system. With the motor neurons, it's mostly going to be gamma and beta motor neurons. So we're going to talk about those later when we get into muscle movement. So yeah, for now, just kind of memorize those 2. That's basically it. All right, question number 1. So it looks like most of you guys got that correct. That's great. So sagittal coronal versus transverse. All right, so it's kind of hard to see the division here, but it looks like some of these were a little bit tougher than others. But anyways, that being said, let's just go to the full question here. What's this first region over here on the top? That's dorsal. Here is what? Good. What's this one over here? Rostral, and then caudal. Awesome. All right, moving on. All right, good. Most of you guys got this correct. So gray matter, mostly going to be cell bodies, right? It's also going to involve some dendrites. White matter, on the other hand, is going to be mostly myelinated fibers. Okay, so that's why it's white, because of all the fatty tissue within the myelin. All right, telencephalon. The telencephalon. Are you guys familiar with the term telos? Telos, it comes from like philosophy, right? Telos is kind of like the thing that you're trying to like reach for as a goal, right? So telos is a goal, something that's like high up that you're trying to achieve, right? Think about that in terms of the telencephalon. That's going to be like the more the more advanced regions of our brain, right? So for animals like ourselves, right, as well as, great apes, cetaceans are going to have very advanced cerebellums, right? Cerebral cortex, cerebellum, cerebrums. The cerebrum is going to be much more advanced. And so the telencephalon eventually derives into the adult derivatives of the cerebral cortex. Then basal ganglia is also going to be thrown in there as well, and then the basal forebrain and the amygdala. Not parts of the brainstem. Okay. The brainstem is going to be subdivided in 2 different areas. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. All right, cool. Looks like more of you got this one correct. So metencephalon, okay, so metencephalon, that's going to be your pons and cerebellum. Okay, so make sure you know your metencephalon, mesencephalon, myelencephalon, and what those turn into. Okay, Let's do one more. I think we have one more question on that. All right, so diencephalon is going to be the region that eventually turns into like some of the major controllers of homeostasis in your body, right? Think about the thalamus, the hypothalamus, epithalamus, which encompasses superior and inferior colliculi as well as the pineal gland. But the thalamus and the hypothalamus are really important structures that help to maintain all sorts of physiological activities, right? Think about the thalamus, the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is going to be especially involved in releasing all sorts of different hormones, like releasing hormones, inhibiting hormones. It's also going to be involved in like temperature control. If you're going to spike a fever because you have an infection, what mediates that? It's going to be the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is going to mediate all temperature changes. If it's cold outside like it is today and you have to start shivering, that's going to be mediated by the hypothalamus. So definitely know the diencephalon. I have more questions here about this. Let's see what the next one is. All right, no more questions on those, but I'm going to do a pop quiz on you in a second. All right, how'd you guys do? Well, looks like most of you guys got the majority of these correct. Let's go through some of these here together. So which ones did you guys miss? Was it B and G? So what was B and G? Dang it, I can't see the label. So B was this one over here, and then G was the motor association area. So we had primary somatosensory cortex. That was going to be whatever this box is. Can't see the letters. I think that was the one that some of you all missed. Was it the primary? Did some of you guys miss that one? The primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, and then the other one that a lot of you guys missed up was the primary motor cortex. Oh, you did? Okay. So know that motor cortex in the front, right? So precentral gyrus, postcentral gyrus is going to be sensory. But it looks like most of you guys got the other ones correct, so that's great. Broca's area is going to be in the front. Wernicke's area is going to be a little bit more posterior to that. Good. 100% of you guys got that correct. Frontal lobe is going to be associated with personality and all of that. So let's move on. Are these all softball questions for you guys now? Not so much. Okay, so cerebellum. So what's the cerebrum compared to the cerebellum? What's the cerebrum? Where's the cerebellum at? Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be behind the brainstem. Where's the cerebrum at? You have two major parts of the cerebrum, right? The cerebrum's the cortex, right? Cerebral cortex, cerebrum. Okay, so that's like a same thing, right? So with the cerebrum, you got the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and all that stuff. Insular cortex, all that stuff. Cerebellum, that's going to be what's responsible for coordinating movements, right? Progression of movements, smoothing out movements, and what have you. All right, we're definitely going to go through all these then. Major purpose of this brain region is to inhibit unwanted or inappropriate movements. That's going to be the basal ganglia. Now, like I said before, we're going to get into the basal ganglia in extremely painful amounts of detail for this class, okay? I'm very sorry about that, but it's really important for those two major conditions, Parkinson's and Huntington's disease, right? There's portions of the basal ganglia that are always on, like, for example, the globus pallidus, internus, and externus. Those are always on. And when they're on, they're turning everything off. So when you turn that region off, then you killed the off switch. Then everything turns on, right? And so those regions are going to be constantly inhibiting movement until they get turned off. And when they get turned off, that's when you're actually able to initiate movement. So it's kind of like a counterintuitive process. So in other words, your brain is constantly trying to stop unwanted movement. It only wants to initiate movement that truly needs to be initiated, right? And so that's what the basal ganglia is doing. So really important in inhibiting those unwanted movements. If you don't have dopamine to turn off, for example, the striatum, if you can't turn off this, if you can't stimulate the striatum is what turns off the globus pallidus. If you can't turn off the globus pallidus, then you get Parkinson's disease, right? Because if you can't stop the off switch, then you're going to have a hard time initiating movement. That's kind of like what undergirds Parkinson's disease. Like I said, we're going to go into basal ganglia in a terrible amount of detail later on. You're going to learn all the neurotransmitters involved, GABA, glutamate, and all that stuff. A lot of those are involved in that whole process. Cool. Looks like most of you guys got this correct. So upper motor neuron, think if you get damage there, everything goes up, right? So spasticity, reflexes, you become hyperreflexic. Lower motor neurons, everything goes down. You become flaccid, and on top of that, you have hyporeflexia if you have a lower motor neuron damage. And then we're going to learn about ALS later on, and ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or Lou Gehrig's disease, it's both an upper and lower motor neuron disorder. So you can see a combination of both of those things happening. Okay, but this is like the quick and dirty. If you have like someone who severed a nerve somewhere, like maybe lower motor neuron, or if they had like spinal cord injury, or if they had brain damage from a stroke, then you can see what kind of which areas might be affected just by doing a really simple physical exam on a patient. Patellar reflex, right? Different types of reflexes. Precise motor movements, decussation at the pyramids, lateral cortical spinal tract. Okay. The majority of those motor fibers, the majority are going to cross over, right, at the pyramids, and they're going to go laterally down the spinal cord. That's why it's called lateral cortical spinal tract. And so those are going to be associated with your precise motor movements. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Awesome. Looks like most of you guys got this correct. Processing perception of both some aesthetic and proprioceptive input from the contralateral side of the body. So primary somatosensory cortex. Excellent. Good. Awesome. Good. Dorsal column, medial lemniscus pathway. So that's great. So that's exactly what you see with fine touch, proprioception, right? This is also what gets affected by what condition we just talked about? We watched a short video with a guy talking about neurosyphilis. It's all that condition is also called what when it affects this region specifically? Dorsalis is part of it. Tabes dorsalis. So tabes dorsalis would affect this region. Cool. Let's move on. Okay, good. Lateral spinal thalamic tract, that's going to be carrying pain and temperature. Perfect. All right, that was a softball question. My favorite part of the brain, my favorite types of neurons. I think they're absolutely fascinating. Von Economo neurons in the insula.
Good questions. Make me think.
That's my goal. Did you guys remember? This is like one of the major differences between the cervical vertebrae and the cervical spine, right? Where you have the nerves coming off. So you have, 8 nerve pairs, 7 vertebrae. So that's perfect. Good job. All right, cool. Dorsal root ganglia are responsible for sensory input, whereas ventral root neurons are responsible for motor output. Definitely know the difference between those two. Super important. That was a softball question. Excellent. So maybe I should make you remember all the Rex lamina, all 12. All right, Rex lamina number 9. What is it? What kind of, Movement, motor. Good. So motor control. All right. So real quick, what does the telencephalon turn into?
Basal ganglia.
Yeah, part of the basal ganglia. What else? Yeah. So cerebral cortex. Okay, so telencephalon is going to turn into your cerebral cortex. Basal ganglia, also amygdala, part of the basal forebrain. What about diencephalon? And epithalamus. Retina too, yeah. But epithalamus, which encompasses the pineal gland and all that stuff. What about the mesencephalon? So yeah, substantia nigra, that's good. That's going to be midbrain. So remember, your brainstem is midbrain, pons, medulla. Okay, what about myelencephalon? Yeah, that's good. So myelencephalon, medulla. That's great. What about metencephalon? Yeah, pons and cerebellum. So that's good. So know your embryonic derivatives, okay? So that's good stuff. Cool. So I just uploaded the updates to part 2. There wasn't much change in there, but regardless, take the download the new slides. I'm also going to probably do some changes to part 3, just a couple added things that I wanted to put in there. What was your question?
How are your quizzes set up or your exams set up?
It's going to be similar to what I do in my quizzes.
Okay, so
Right.
multiple choice.
Yeah, it's always going to be multiple choice. I don't want to read hieroglyphics, and I don't want to have to.
Do you have like a picture where you're like, all right, rank them all in?
No. It's going to be if there's going to be like a cross section of like an anatomical feature that you need to be. It would be like an arrow. What's A pointing to, right? Or what would happen if A got damaged? What would be like the symptoms and the results of that, right? So it's going to be stuff like that. Very, very, very similar to what I do in my quizzes. Okay, there's not going to be much. The questions are going to be different, but the concepts are going to be the same. Okay, I'm just going to ask them in different ways. Okay, so that's how I structure my exams. And like I said, if I don't talk about it in class, I am not going to put it on the test. So I'm only going to test you on what we discuss in class.